Good evening, and I want to express my sincere thanks to the Illinois Dem County chairs for having us. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to address you. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sharon Fairley, and I am a candidate for the office of Illinois Attorney General. I'm also a mother, an attorney, and frankly, a concerned Democrat. I'm here tonight because I believe that our state, and in fact our nation, are in unprecedented peril. Our civil rights, our health, and our well-being are under siege. And to prevail, I believe we need the kind of experienced and independent leadership that I'm uniquely qualified to bring to this important office. I have an undergraduate degree from Princeton in mechanical and aerospace engineering, which shows that I don't shrink from tough problems. I have an MBA, and I have business experience, which shows I know how to manage people and processes and budgets. And as a lawyer, I've worked in police reform. You can be confident that I know how to lead an agency responsible for complex legal matters because I've already done it as the Chief Administrator of the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. As Attorney General, I will demand integrity and transparency out of our government, and I will work to promote strong, progressive democratic values, and I will always stand up and fight for all the citizens of Illinois against the corporate and political interests that seek to divide and exploit us. I hope you will stand with me. Thank you.
Next for a 90-second opening statement is Aaron Goldstein.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Aaron Goldstein. And when I graduated law school, I applied for one job. That was to be a Cook County public defender. It was the year 2000, and the economy was going very well, and there were great opportunities for lawyers to make a lot of money, to go in status positions. But I wanted to represent the indigent because I knew of some fundamental things, and that is our criminal justice system is unfair, that the Constitution specifically says we have the right to counsel. Those aren't just some words on a piece of paper. That's a moral contract. And I've lived those words my entire career, and that's what I want to do as Attorney General. So as Attorney General, it will be a bold, progressive agenda with three very important points. Number one, we stand up to these big powers, the big banks and the big corporations that are taking advantage of us, and that tyrant in the White House, Donald Trump. We must fight him every step of the way. Number two, we must have real criminal justice reform. That includes ending cash bail, ending mass incarceration, and fighting this racist drug war. Part of criminal justice reform is also police accountability. And for police accountability, we must have a consent decree in Chicago, and we must have the community involved. And finally, we must tackle corruption, and that's what I'll do as Attorney General. Thank you.
Now Renato Mariotti.
My name is Renato Mariotti, and I'm running for Attorney General to fight for working families like mine. I was born in Chicago to two parents, neither of whom went to college, and both of whom worked two jobs to put me through school. Thanks to their hard work, I was able to go to the University of Chicago and Yale Law School, and ultimately I came back here to Illinois, and I was hired by Pat Fitzgerald to be a federal prosecutor. I'm 41 now. I worked there for almost a decade, and I focused on white-collar crime, going after the people who take advantage of the system and prey on people like seniors and other vulnerable groups, cheating them to benefit themselves. About a year and a half ago, after some difficult and challenging trials and a fight with cancer, which I was fortunately able to win, I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I thought I'd be slowing down. But frankly, there was just a lot of problems in this state and in this country, and I started getting more involved and doing more. Some of you have seen me, whether it's on television or the internet or offline in groups, trying to organize and talk about what Donald Trump is doing to this country. And frankly, I'm pretty fed up with it because what he's doing is squeezing families like mine. You know, my dad's a cashier at Walmart. He's relying on his paycheck, and instead of helping people like him, he's helping people at the top. So what do I bring to the table? Unlike the other people here, I'm an outsider. I'm not a politician. I'm not an insider. I'm not a Rahm or Madigan appointee. I'm somebody who brings independence to the position, and I'll fight for you. Thank you. I'm Renato Mariotti.
Thank you. Now the opening statement from Pat Quinn.
Well, I'm Pat Quinn. I'm glad to be here in our state capital of Springfield. It's very important that an Attorney General be a lawyer for all the people of Illinois, and that especially means downstate Illinois. I want to thank my friends from Brookport, Illinois, who've come all the way from the tip of the Ohio River right here to the Capitol, because the Attorney General has to be an attorney for the people of Illinois. That is the job definition, to be a strong advocate for everyday people who live from paycheck to paycheck. Especially now, the Attorney General is the last line of defense against Trump and his attack on our democracy. We must always defend the fundamental rights of our citizens. That includes health care. I signed the bill for affordable health care here in Illinois. Over 1 million people have been able to get decent health care because of that law. And we can't let Trump take it away. That's the job of the Attorney General. The Attorney General's got to take on the big utilities, Commonwealth Edison, Ameren, AT&T, whoever they may be. If they're taking advantage of consumers, the Attorney General has to work with the Citizen Utility Board to protect the consumer and to protect everyday people. Long time ago, I started a group called the Citizen Utility Board, Illinois' largest consumer group. And this is the first envelope of CUB many years ago. And so I think together we can work with the people of Illinois to make sure the Attorney General is always the lawyer of the people.
Now a 90-second opening statement from Nancy Rodering.
Thank you all for coming out on this snowy evening. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, IDCCA, for this opportunity to talk with all of you. My name's Nancy Rodering. I'm currently a mayor. I'm in my 7th year, and I've done my mayor thing. I've balanced my budgets, maintained my AAA bond rating. I also got sued by the NRA and taken to the United States Supreme Court for banning assault weapons and large-capacity magazines. I've stood up to utilities when they have failed our region and ended up getting over $50 million invested in our infrastructure. And I created a legal aid clinic to help people in the areas of housing and immigration and domestic violence. Because I feel if you're going to lose your home or your family or possibly your life, you should have access to justice. I tell you these stories as a mom of 4. I tell you these stories as a mayor. And I also tell you these stories as a lifelong advocate. I'm a proud member of the board of Planned Parenthood and will always fight for a woman's right to choose. And as Attorney General, I'll stand up to polluters. I will make sure that we have criminal justice reform and stand up for honest and accessible government. A little about my background. I went to Stanford. I have an MBA from Northwestern. My law degree is from the University of Chicago. So I bring that background in business and law, but I also bring experience from the executive branch of government. I'm so honored to be with you tonight. I'm eager to have the opportunity to be that advocate for our state. We're facing civil rights and human rights attacks right now. We need an independent, strong Attorney General who will stand up for our fundamental rights. Thank you.
And our final opening statement from Jesse Ruiz.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Chairs Association. Thanks to all of you for your kind attention. Jesse Ruiz, and I want to be your Attorney General because the American dream is under attack. And it's under attack by our own president and governor. As the son of Mexican immigrants, I understand the struggles of working families, and so I want to stand up for them. My dad came here from Mexico as a migrant farm worker with only a 3rd grade education, picked crops all over the United States until he landed here in Chicago, in Chicago, on the far south side, Roseland neighborhood where I grew up. Because of my parents' hard work and sacrifices, I was able to go to the University of Illinois with only $300 in my pocket, earn my bachelor's degree in economics, and only come out with $10,000 in debt. Then went to work in the steel industry, where I got to earn $21,000 in my starting job at Inland Steel, twice what I owed in debt. And I'm concerned that's not possible anymore. I then got to go to the University of Chicago Law School and had the privilege of being taught the law by folks like Elena Kagan and Barack Obama. I also met my wife, so I have to mention that. And so I've had a chance at the American dream to go and practice law for the last 21 years, to do pro bono legal service, and more importantly, to do public service, primarily in the field of public education. So I want to make sure that I'm Attorney General to give that chance to every Illinoisan, to make sure it continues to be a path to the American dream, to protect consumers, to protect our environment, to protect our access to affordable health care, to ensure there's criminal justice reform, and everyone has equal access to justice. I want to be the people's champion, their advocate, your Attorney General. Thank you.
Candidates, thank you. And now to our questions. Some of these I've developed myself. Others have come from submissions from various groups or voters around the state, and we will go through alternating the order as to who answers first. Our first question will be put first to Aaron Goldstein. How far would you go to challenge or defy the immigration enforcement policies of the federal government? Mr. Goldstein.
So
With the election of Donald Trump, we've seen an absolute attack on immigrants. I think it comes from a very evil, racist place. So, as Attorney General, we need to be at the forefront of protecting all Illinoisans, immigrants, citizens, residents, it doesn't matter. So I will go as far as I have to defend the rights of immigrants. And what we've seen is an absolute assault on our immigrants. So I'm a strong supporter of DACA. I support what Attorney General Madigan did when it came to defending DACA recipients, and I will do that in every single way. I'll also be an advocate for a path to citizenship to the 11 million undocumented immigrants we have. So I will be as strong an advocate as you will see for the immigrants in our state, and I'm proud of doing that, and I believe that Illinois should be a sanctuary state for immigrants.
Mr. Mariotti.
Look, let's be real. What Donald Trump is doing is using immigrants as an excuse to deny funding to our state, as an excuse to attack states like ours, and also as a way of trying to divide us. He is trying to force us to use our law enforcement and state resources to round up people he doesn't like and help him ship them out of this country. It's not only wrong, it's actually unconstitutional, and if he tries to push forward and force us to do that, I'll take legal action to stop him, period. You know, he has already been stopped on the issue of sanctuary cities. The Justice Department has filed suit trying to stop payments to the city of Chicago because it's a sanctuary city. Fortunately, a federal judge blocked that, but the Justice Department is still withholding the money. And as Attorney General, what I would do is I'd intervene because we cannot let the Trump administration try to dictate what we do here in Illinois and try to deny funding that we should be having because of their, immigration policies that are meant to divide us and meant to hurt people that they don't like.
Pat Quinn.
It's all about the due process of law. It's very important that the Attorney General of Illinois, the land of Lincoln, always upholds the law of our country and the law of our state. When the President breaks the law or violates the Constitution, it's the duty of the Attorney General, the lawyer for all the people, to step in and protect the people of Illinois. We are an independent state. There are amendments to the Constitution that give us the opportunity to decide for ourselves what our policies are. We cannot allow people in Washington, Trump, Sessions, or others like him, to violate our laws, to violate our sovereignty. So it's very important to defend those fundamental principles that our country is based on. We believe that government is based on the consent of the governed, not an autocratic system where the President of the United States tries to impose his will on the people of Illinois. So the Attorney General must defend our fundamental rights.
The question is, again, how far would you go to challenge or perhaps even defy the immigration enforcement policies of the federal government? Now to Nancy Rotering.
Thank you. We are the great nation that we are because of our immigrants, and it's so important to protect people who are part of our nation, part of our community. That's what I did when I founded my legal aid clinic. We focused on helping people know their rights and understand how to renew their DACA status, and unfortunately even put together guardianship in the unlikely case that somebody might be taken at work. It's so important for the people in our community to know that they're protected by the police, that if they are the victims of domestic violence, they shouldn't be afraid to call for help because of their citizenship or lack thereof. And then lastly, it's important that we fight this effort to identify who's got what citizenship status in our census. I've signed a letter as a mayor with the U.S. Conference of Mayors disagreeing with this proposal from our federal government. It's incumbent on all of us to recognize that all of us have something to offer to this great nation and to stand up for each and every person.
Now to Jesse Ruiz.
I will go as far as legally possible and stand up to the affronts on our constitutional rights. I recall the time when I was chairman of the State Board of Education in February of 2006. There was a case called Plyler versus Doe that I learned in Barack Obama's class at the University of Chicago, which states students, regardless of immigration status, have a right to a public education in this country. And when there was a suburban Chicago school district that was not giving students that rights, in the first time in history, we shut them down. They relented in 24 hours, but we took the steps of shutting them down. And so I've been doing this. I look forward to doing this. I've personally, on a pro bono basis, helped a student achieve deferred action status, created a DACA clinic at our firm with an outside corporation's law department, and helped dozens of students to do this. My father was undocumented. After leaving that farm picking corn in Mendota, Illinois, when he went to Chicago, he was undocumented from 47 to 55. But in those days, there was a path to become a legal resident. He was able to come back, contribute, raise 4 productive kids, and so it's a critical part of our country that we continue to have a path for immigrants to come here and contribute to our great nation.
Now to Sharon Fairley.
I also will be fighting very strongly to push back on the Trump administration. And this is what I mean when I say the powerful trying to divide us. This is the Trump administration using people who are coming to this country to seek opportunity to drive a wedge between all of us and to divide us so that their powers can go unchecked, and we cannot allow that to happen. As Attorney General, I will work to reinforce the concept of sanctuary cities. I will work to ensure that all of our law enforcement agencies across the state are honoring the Trust Act and are not being used as an arm of the federal immigration policy. I will work to continue to promote support for our DACA. I will work to make sure that the immigration deal that's currently being considered, if that turns out to be something that I believe is harmful to our state, I will be taking legal action against that. This is not just because it's the right thing to do morally and ethically. This is something that has a profound effect on our economy and our public safety. And as Attorney General, we're responsible for pushing back on that.
Our next subject area is perhaps not as headline grabbing, but it's an important part of the Illinois Attorney General's office. That's consumer protection. What strategies would you implement to improve consumer protection for Illinoisans? First to Renato Mariotti.
Yeah, frankly, it's really important. It's why I talked about fighting for working families, because that's the most important thing that the Attorney General's office does. And there's a couple things that I want to do. First of all, we need to focus on wage theft. And I know that's something that we don't talk a lot about, but there are employers that are not paying their employees the overtime that they're due, the vacation, the time that they're due. They're misclassifying employees. There's over $50 million in claims that aren't getting paid out. And if you're somebody who's working in Walmart or working at a place like that, waiting a year to get your $200 or your $500, that's serious business. That's something that I could tackle as Attorney General. But more importantly, we have to take on financial institutions and do a better job and do more and build on the current efforts on that, because frankly things are becoming harder at the federal level. The Trump administration has defunded the Consumer Protection Bureau, and they are now letting banks force us into arbitration. That's why we need a strong Attorney General, because the banks are not going to let us go to court on our own. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hold the banks accountable, just like I did as a federal prosecutor when I took on people in financial institutions.
Thank you, Governor Quinn.
Well, I helped start the Citizen Utility Board, Illinois' largest consumer group that takes on utilities every single day. And I think right now a very important issue is whether it's Ameren or ComEd or AT&T, they just got a huge tax break from Trump in Washington. They've got to give back money to the consumers. This is very important not only for utility companies, but also these big banks. Many of them took advantage of consumers over the past decade. Again, they got a huge tax cut in Washington. They've got to reduce their fees, whether it's ATM fees or their fees on student loans. And I also think insurance companies. Why should we pay very high car insurance or health insurance rates if these insurance companies have gotten gigantic tax cuts from Trump? It's important for the Attorney General of Illinois to seek justice for consumers. That's the job definition. There's a law in Illinois called the Consumer Fraud and Deceptive Trade Practices Act. I know that law. I know it well. I've represented consumers, and it's important that the Attorney General step forward and make sure we get a fair shake.
Now to Nancy Rotering.
Under the current rollback of the federal protections, it's going to be more incumbent than ever on the Attorney General of the state of Illinois to stand up for our families and the most vulnerable among us, our seniors, our veterans, people with disabilities. We need to make sure that that person understands where the hot spots are and takes on unfair lenders, takes on bad landlords, but most importantly, provides outreach and education to the public so they know what tools are available if somebody is defrauding them, if they are becoming victims of a scam, how to reach out and how to get that help. That's an important part of the Attorney General's role, and it's going to be more important now than ever.
The question again is about policies to be implemented to improve consumer protection for Illinoisans. Now to Jesse Ruiz.
Thank you. Yes, policies, laws, not only the power to sue, but to advocate in the General Assembly to make sure that we have the proper legislative protections as well, especially in an era where Equifax, I'm sure, was not on the Attorney General's mind 16 years ago when she took office. And now we're fighting to protect our privacy and our financial information. Students, the housing bubble was devastating to our nation and our economy in 08, 09. The next bubble could be the student loan bubble, and I'm very concerned, especially when there's a promulgation of for-profit colleges and universities. It could be a good thing that it gives people educational opportunities, but some of them are unscrupulous and try to load up students with onerous, burdensome loans at very unfair terms, and then don't give them the skills and the education necessary to have gainful employment to be able to earn a living to repay those loans. So I'm very concerned about those students and making sure that we protect them and don't have a student loan bubble that happens upon our country, because the amount of loans out there is even more so than you saw in the housing crisis.
Thank you. Sharon Fairley.
This is one of the areas where the Attorney General has the primary responsibility. The Attorney General must stand up for the people who don't have the resources to represent themselves to defend their economic health and well-being. There are several fronts where this is really important. Obviously, when we talk about disadvantageous consumer lending practices and exploitive business practices, but also defending our environmental practices, standing up to the energy companies on the rates that are paid. And this is why it's important that we have an Attorney General who has the experience investigating and prosecuting the kinds of cases that are at issue here. When I was a federal prosecutor, I prosecuted a case where there were individuals who were defrauding elderly homeowners by taking money from them, claiming that they could get their mortgages reduced. And what they did was they actually went underground and started using aliases, and that's how they got away with it for a while. But because I had the experience to investigate these cases, I found them and brought them to justice, and I will bring that experience to the Office of the Attorney General.
And now to Aaron Goldstein.
Consumer protection is obviously such a big issue, and it's fundamentally an issue that's in the hands of the Attorney General. We can change the laws, and I will advocate for better consumer protection laws, but most importantly, what the Attorney General can do is go into court and defend all of us, be our advocate. And the key is to be independent. If you are an individual, if you're a candidate that's accepting campaign contributions from these utilities, then I don't believe you can be independent. And I promise to you, I have not received any of those campaign contributions, and I will not receive any of those campaign contributions. So that's an important issue. What I will do is be the greatest advocate for justice for all of us in the state of Illinois. And I think of 2008 with the banking crisis, and I think most of us feel that justice was not served, that people got, the big banks got a bailout, and we got the shaft. So I want to be that Attorney General that stands up for all of us for consumer protection.
Candidates, thank you. Our next question focuses on the environment. How much of a focus would you have on environmental issues as Attorney General? First to former Governor Pat Quinn.
Well, I think this is a very key issue because Trump has put in a person for this region, for our state, who is not someone who is a defender of the environment. A Trump appointee is protecting our clean water and clean air. And I think it's very important for the Attorney General to always be fighting for the environment of our state. It's part of our Constitution. It's part of the job definition of the Attorney General. Not far from here, we have the Mahatma Aquifer. It's a drinking water of thousands and thousands of people. We've got to protect that from any kind of pollution. Same way with the Mississippi River or the Ohio River or any river in Illinois that's part of the drinking water of our state. We cannot allow what happened in Flint, Michigan to happen here in Illinois. Lake Michigan is the largest source of drinking water in Illinois, and it's very important for the Attorney General to be the strongest voice for clean water in our state. When I was governor, I started the Clean Water Initiative, $2 billion to invest in clean water, and that's what we got to do.
Mayor Rodering.
As a member of the Sierra Club since 1976, the environment has been very important to me my entire life. It's something that I've been involved with even since I was elected to office. I created an environmental advocacy program for public school kids, and over 5,000 kids learned how to advocate on behalf of our environment across 10 curricular tracks. It is absolutely crucial that the Attorney General get it. It's absolutely crucial that the Attorney General be a fierce warrior to protect our water and our air and our land and make sure that everybody here has the opportunity to access these natural resources without fear that turning on the tap, such as mentioned with the Muhammad Aquifer, those 850,000 people who could set their water on fire because of the presence of natural gas. I will be that defender. I will be that protector. When Flint happened, I demanded that all public taps in my city be tested for lead. I got pushback from other governments. To me, that's absolutely our role in public life, is to stand up for the health, welfare, and safety of those that we've been entrusted to protect.
Now to Jesse Ruiz.
I concur, frankly. As president of the Park District Board, we have 26 miles of lakefront in Chicago, and for those who actively participated along that lakefront, there are a number of drinking fountains across there, and so we ordered a review of all of those post the Flint incident, and some of those now run continuously because that is the way to fix it and make sure that they are being flushed of lead that's in the system until we can get the capital dollars to, frankly, do the ultimate fix in replacing some of those old pipes. You know, in the South Side Rosa neighborhood where I grew up, we're surrounded by landfills. You know, in fact, when Barack was a community organizer, the first time I met him in his office at the University of Chicago Law School, this is what we talked about. This is the issues he was working on in Elkdale Gardens, a public housing project. So I desperately want to focus on making sure we have a clean, because there is no American dream if our environment is going to kill us. And so we have to ensure that we have a clean air, water, and land, especially for those folks who don't have the power and the privilege to fight back of things going into their backyards.
The question again, how much of a focus would you have on environmental issues as Attorney General? Now to Sharon Fairley.
This is one of the areas where the Attorney General's powers are actually broadest, because the Attorney General can proactively use the law to do civil and criminal enforcement. We know that the Attorney General is going to have to play an increasingly important role here, because under both the Trump administration and the Rauner administration, the EPA and the Illinois EPA are not doing their job. We know that since Rauner has been in place, referrals to the Attorney General's office, violations, have fallen by over 50%. As Attorney General, environmental justice to me is a primary focus. We have communities like Waukegan where there's a third of children in some communities who are suffering from asthma or asthma-like symptoms because of the pet coke that's been deposited in their water. This is unconscionable. As Attorney General, I will work through taking the law and the rule of law to do remediation, to make sure companies are paying for the damage that they've done, that they are paying to prevent damage from happening in the future, and that they are fined if their violations are egregious.
Now to Aaron Goldstein.
As Attorney General, I will be proactive defending the environment. I don't think we should just wait for referrals coming from the Illinois EPA in order to enforce environmental hazards and protect the environment. And what we have to see is, you know, we're asking these questions, and these are all very good questions, and they're pigeonholed on particular issues, which they obviously have to be. But we have to see these issues as connected. I see environmental justice the similar as civil rights, similar as racial justice, similar as income inequality. All those issues need to be put together, because the people that receive the worst part of the environmental injustices are the low-income communities, the communities of color, that are facing this every single day. There's a reference, as Mr. Ruiz said, in the southeast side, kids have manganese. They were found in their toenails. The amount of damage that can do to kids is absolutely atrocious. So we have to be proactive. And I want to look at actually courageous lawsuits that go after global warming, go after the fossil fuel industry.
And to Renato Mariotti.
So this is an area where you may not realize that the Attorney General is the primary environmental enforcer in the state of Illinois, and our job's harder because the Trump administration isn't doing their job. The Trump administration is appointed people that had the EPA who don't even believe in science, and the Rauner administration has been reducing coal standards here in Illinois, down in southern Illinois for Dynegy, and frankly, the Rauner administration has been doing damage to our environment. So as Illinois Attorney General, I'll be somebody, I've already been somebody for Sierra Club and the League of Conservation Voters, taking a leadership role, digging in and doing what I could as a private citizen. I would do even more as Attorney General. And frankly, part of that is going to be not just these issues that are in urban areas, but agribusiness that hurts small family farms, and there's runoff that actually harms not only our air and our water, but sometimes even our land and our rivers.
Our next question delves into the subject of combating public corruption. Specifically, how will your approach to public corruption be different from the incumbent Attorney General, Lisa Madigan? This question goes first to Nancy Rotering.
So when I became mayor, I shook up City Hall and brought cameras into meetings where previously there hadn't been cameras, expanded ethics guidelines to include appointed and elected officials on a much broader scale, and really emphasized access to information. It's so critical that the Public Access Counselor and the Attorney General's Office have expanded resources and opportunities. I currently sit on the Comptroller's Local Government Advisory Board, and one of the things that we're tasked with is improving uniformity and access to financial information. If you think about Dixon, Illinois, how did that happen in such a small city? Who wasn't paying attention? Who didn't know what was available to them in terms of information? Who didn't know how to take the next step and deal with that? When we have corruption, we lose. We lose our trust in our officials, and we lose our efficiencies in our government. It's important to make that a priority, and as Attorney General, I will expand and build off of public access and provide outreach to people so that across all governments, not just state and county, but also local, people will know how to address corruption head-on.
Mr. Ruiz.
Well, first of all, seek expanded grand jury authority statewide so we can pursue those corruption cases anywhere and everywhere across the state, but also use the tools that we have. I see some folks in the audience who would attend State Board of Education meetings when I was chair, and everything was done in public. We truly abided by the Open Meetings Act. Unfortunately, I have colleagues at the Chicago Board of Education who don't do that. They do their board briefings in public, and I've called on them to change that practice, to do everything in public. And when I was there, I also called out the last CEO when he was trying to hire a general counsel who was still being paid by a law firm that he hired and then tried to supervise. I reported it to the chief ethics officer, and that ultimately led to Forrest Claypool having to resign, and I was the first person to call on him resign. So I've never been afraid to call it out when I see it, and I've walked the talk in terms of when I've had the opportunity to run a body like the State Board of Education. Everything was done in public, and I will make sure that every public body in the state does the same.
Ms. Fairley.
So public integrity is one of the areas where I believe the office should play a much more proactive and strategic role, and I've actually put out on my website a list of reforms that I would put in place as Attorney General. The first thing we need to understand is that we need more checks and balances at all levels of government that allows us to hold our political actors accountable when they make the wrong choices. I would start up a task force that would put together the state's attorney's office and law enforcement agencies across the state to make sure that they not only have the expertise, but help them get the political will to actually hold political actors accountable. This includes not just criminal prosecution, but because sometimes those can be tough cases to build, but also just administrative prosecution, fining people, punishing people when they've made the wrong decisions. This is why it's incredibly important that we have an attorney general that's actually independent and that doesn't owe any favors to anyone in political office. You have candidates in this race who have taken major dollars from not only corporate interests like the energy companies, but also from political actors. That's a problem.
Once again, the question is, how will your approach to public corruption be different from the incumbent AG, Lisa Madigan? That question now goes to Aaron Goldstein.
Thank you. I'm not one of those people that took those contributions, just for the record. But there's sort of bookends to this. The first portion of that is transparency, which has been discussed, which is the Public Access Counselor, which deals with Open Meetings Act and FOIA requests. And we need to beef that up because it is underfunded, it's under-resourced, and not enough of those referrals are being dealt with and resolved, and we need to fix that. That's number one. Then the other end of it is actually prosecuting the corruption, which I don't think enough has been done, quite frankly. For whatever reason, I'm not here to speculate why that was not done by the current Attorney General. The fact is we need to do more of it. Because if we lose the trust in our government, then we have no faith in politics and we have no faith in government. And that's terrible for democracy. So we really need to push hard, and I will do that. That will be a number one priority for me to attack corruption.
Mr. Mariotti?
You know, as I've traveled this state, and I've been all over, I think, at this point, one of the things that just makes me angry is when I talk to people in our own party, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, who don't trust the leaders of our own party and feel the party has let us down, and they're questioning whether or not they want to be a Democrat anymore. That really upsets me because, frankly, it's not right that our party has part of losing the trust of people in this state, citizens, voters, activists. And you know what? There's a lot of things that aren't working. I mean, when I was in Rock Island, You know, there's a healthcare facility, a nursing home that isn't getting its bills paid. There's AFSCME employees who haven't gotten the raise that they were due back in 2011. And they're angry and they're upset about what's happening in the state, and it's wrong. And so, frankly, that's a big reason why I'm running for this. I'm an independent person. I haven't taken any money from special interests. I haven't taken big checks. My average contribution is under $100. But I'm somebody who isn't a politician, isn't an insider, hasn't been running for office for decades. I am somebody who's going to come in and I'm going to change the system and be an independent voice.
And that question finally to Pat Quinn.
Well, I believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. That's why I signed the law to enhance Freedom of Information Act with a public access counselor. I do think we need more resources, as has been mentioned, in the Office of Attorney General to enforce that law. I also think we need a conflict of interest law that's mandatory in Illinois with enhanced disclosure. We passed petitions back in 1976 for that, and it's important to keep on working to get that done. That's why I believe in an ethics initiative where voters can pass tough ethics laws, even if legislators or politicians don't want that. I think it's very important for the Attorney General to be a leader in getting an ethics initiative. And as has been mentioned, with respect to this issue of campaign contributions from utilities, I don't take campaign contributions from utilities. The folks to my right, none of them take campaign contributions to my left. They all have taken maximum contributions from Commonwealth Edison, People's Gas, and Exelon. I don't think that's healthy. I do think it's a conflict of interest. The Attorney General should not take campaign money from big utilities.
Our next question now, several of you have alluded to this in terms of the public access counselor function of the office, but let's talk in general about the Attorney General's office. Does the AG's office have sufficient staff, and are those staffers sufficiently compensated to carry out the work and priorities of the office? That question first to Jesse Ruiz.
They could do more, and we have to fight to make sure we have more resources so that we can do more in that office and look for creative ways to leverage other resources. And I was chairman of the Chicago Bar Foundation, and we fund millions of dollars in public interest and pro bono legal aid clinics all over the Chicagoland area, and there are other organizations that do this across the state as well, leveraging all those resources that we can make sure can work on behalf of the citizens of Illinois as well, and making sure that we, at times that we have settlements, as they say in an airplane, you have to put your mask on yourself first before you can help the person next to you. And so we have to put the mask on ourselves first and make sure we have the resources there to make sure we're competitive, to have the professionals we need to serve the citizens of Illinois. And I'd just like to point out one thing. One other thing we need to do is not be hypocritical when Governor Quinn talks about taking, and I did take donations from ComEd and Exelon. They believe in me. But so did he when he was running for governor. And so be honest and transparent about that. I think that's what citizens of Illinois want as well.
Your time is up. Thank you. Sharon Fairley?
So in my view, the office as it presently exists actually is under-resourced. And when you look at the size of this office in comparison to other offices in other states of comparable size, it's actually quite small. It's about 760 full-time employees. Of that, about 380 of them are attorneys. So there's no question that if we had more resources behind the office, we could do more to help people, and that's something that I'd like to do. The budget was somewhere hovering around $83 million. I've already publicly stated that I'd like to work towards increasing that budget to $100 million by 2020. The good news is that there's only about a third of the office's budget that comes from the general fund. The rest of it is self-generated by the office through its enforcement work. And so by being smart and proactive about doing those kinds of activities, the office does have the potential to bring more funding in so that it can support and do more for people. The other thing that that I know, having led the Civilian Office of Police Accountability and having built that agency, I know how we can use technology to try to make the operation more efficient and redesign the organization to making sure we're focusing on the right tasks at the right time.
Mr. Goldstein.
Well, yes, the office is underfunded, and having spoken to some members of the Attorney General's office today, I think I can speak on their behalf that they're underpaid as well. And look, when you sign up for government work, you sort of agree that you're not going to get paid as well as you would in the private sector. I'm a public defender. I know good and well about getting underpaid and overworked. So I understand that. I work in an office in Cook County that's actually larger than the Attorney General's office with a smaller budget. So we do the best we can. And look, I will be a strong advocate to get the resources as much as possible, either through the legislature or through, the settlements that we get. But we have to be realistic. If we're true fighters of corruption, I'm not so sure the legislature is going to be that interested in funding our budget a little more than it already is. So we have to make do with what we have. We have to inspire the individuals in the office who are working their tails off to do the best for the citizens of the state of Illinois, and I will do that.
The question is, again, does the AG's office have sufficient staff, and are those staffers sufficiently compensated to carry out the work on priorities of the office? Renato Mariotti.
Yeah, of course the AG's office doesn't have the resources it needs. I mean, frankly, most of the agencies in the state don't have the resources that they need. It's frankly a disgrace. And I will tell you, I spent some time this year working on that. As a private citizen, I was heading up an initiative between the Sierra Club and state's attorneys' offices to deputize private attorneys as special assistant state's attorneys to do some environmental enforcement, because there's not enough attorneys in the Attorney General's office to handle the environmental cases we have. Isn't that disgusting? And frankly, as a side note, that ComEd would not believe in me. They'd be scared of me. No one's giving me those campaign contributions because of the work I'm doing on behalf of the environment. But I will tell you, our state is a mess, and the AG's office and the lack of resources it has is part of that. And that's why we need to stop electing the same people over and over and expecting something different to happen. We need to change over. We need to elect new people who are going to bring new ideas and some independence so we can change our state government.
Governor Quinn?
Well, the Attorney General's office is a revenue generator for the people of Illinois through the fines and fees and settlements. For example, the mortgage crisis, the suits that were brought money to our state. And I think it's important to share that money with the Attorney General's office, because investing in the office can pay great dividends in the terms of more settlements against polluters, against wrongdoers. There is a law in Illinois that I got passed when I was state treasurer. It's called the Whistleblower Reward and Protection Act. Anybody who sees wrong in state government or local government can report that directly to the Attorney General. If a suit is brought, money is recovered, then that person who brought the information shares in the recovery, and so do the taxpayers. A woman named Evelyn Noob from Southern Illinois, not far from Brookport, saw wrongdoing, reported it. $144 million was recovered for the taxpayers from Blue Cross Blue Shield, and she was awarded a settlement of $29 million. So I think there's fraud out there, and when it is, we ought to have a law that helps the Attorney General ferret it out.
And finally to Mayor Rodering.
It's never been more important to have a strong, well-funded Attorney General's office. When you think about what the Attorney General does, consumer protection, environmental protection, standing up for immigrants' rights, helping victims of crime, standing up for working families. These are the absolutes in terms of protecting the very people of our state. As a mayor, I have a history of working collaboratively across other governments and with other agencies, and I think it's important to find those potential efficiencies, working together with state's attorneys and with other agencies to create those necessary watchdogs and to provide those who are able to stand up, whether it's Southern Illinois or Northern Illinois, whether it's the Quad Cities or Peoria. We need to make sure that we all know what we're standing for, what the role of the Attorney General is, make sure it's sufficiently funded, and make sure we work together to move forward in protecting our fundamental rights.
Candidates, we're now about the halfway point of our forum this evening. We want to turn now to some of the questions submitted by various groups around the state. This first one is submitted by Equality Illinois and expresses concern about possible rollbacks and protections for LGBTQ people. These include the potential for a ban on transgender individuals from serving in the military, also a Supreme Court case that could affect LGBTQ protections in the Illinois Human Rights Act. The question is, how will you ensure that existing LGBTQ inclusive civil rights protections are defended and maintained for Illinois citizens? We begin with Sharon Fairley.
So I would really work strongly to protect the rights of all citizens of Illinois, including the LGBT community. And again, this is one of the areas where I believe the Trump administration is trying to separate us and divide us. This is an area, we're talking basic human and civil rights here. And I will use the rule of law, and I will also engage in the coalition of attorneys general across the states to file lawsuits, to encourage our legislators to take legislative action to prevent some of these things from happening. This is something that's very personal to me, when the attacks on different kinds of groups to sort of set them apart from the rest of us. I have I was born into the Jim Crow era, right? I've seen for whites only signs over sinks. So I am really appalled and outraged by the Trump administration's attacks on minorities, people of color, and the LGBT community. And this is something that I will push back on extremely hard.
Aaron Goldstein.
There's a theme, right? We have this very, very right-wing tyrant in the White House, and what has he done? He's defunded all the good programs throughout the country, and he's put an attack on people that are different from him. And that's the reality of what's going on. And maybe just the one positive that's come out of the Trump era is that we've seen attorneys general throughout the nation have stood up to him on every single issue. So when it comes to the rights of the LGBTQ community, we must stand up every single day on behalf of them. So if there's any issues statewide, any discrimination whatsoever, as Attorney General, I will step up and we will fight that discrimination. If there's something nationwide, if we have to join with other attorneys general throughout the country, I will do that as well, and I will use the bully pulpit to fight every single day for communities that are discriminated against.
Renato Mariotti.
So I would take a lot of steps to protect the LGBT community, and part of that, I think would be a suit regarding the ban on transgender people in serving in the military. I think anybody who wants to serve in the military should be able to. And this was something that Trump announced on Twitter, did not even run through the service chiefs who had already been integrating transgender people in military service actively and has frankly been providing treatment services to them. It's just a way of using those transgender people as a scapegoat to try to get us divided, to try to use them to get votes, and it's wrong. And I'll tell you another thing that they're doing is Attorney General Sessions rescinded the Obama-era guidance and lowered the protection that transgender people get and all LGBTQ citizens get under the civil rights laws, and it's wrong. Even though we have a strong human rights law here in Illinois, people who are here in Illinois need to be able to travel outside of Illinois and still have the same level of protection. I would join suits to fight both as Attorney General.
The question again is, how will you ensure that existing LGBTQ inclusive civil rights protections are defended and maintained in Illinois? Governor Quinn.
Well, the Attorney General of Illinois is the last line of defense for our fundamental and civil rights in our state and our country. So it must be our job as Attorney General to take on Trump every single day. If that's what it takes, so be it. When I was governor, I signed bills dealing with bullying, harassment. I signed the marriage equality law for Illinois, a very important law of our land. And it's important we protect that law and also make sure that the Attorney General carries out the provisions of the Illinois Human Rights Act. That's a fundamental law that protects everyone. We believe in equal justice for everyone. I worked a lot with our veterans when I was lieutenant governor and governor. I know firsthand their heroism. They raise their hand and say, here I am, take me. And when somebody does that to defend our democracy, our right to speak and petition and our freedom of religion, whatever their background is, we should honor that service. It's very important that our veterans, whoever they may be, and our service members and their families be treated properly.
Nancy Rotering.
I'm the proud mother of a gay son, and together we fought for marriage equality, and together we cried when it was passed. And I'm so pleased that he will have the right to love whoever he wants to love in this state, just like my other three sons. And I spent Saturday night with one of my buddies, Chazzy, an 11-year-old transgender girl, and introduced her to all the candidates so she would be able to be the face that they would think of when the future questions came up affecting our trans people. It's so important for us to focus on inclusivity, especially now in this day and age with this president, and to recognize that that is who we are as a people. We are here to fight for inclusivity. We are here to fight for civil rights. It doesn't have to be personal because it impacts all of us, and I will do whatever it takes, take whatever action is necessary to make sure that every single person in this state can love whomever they wish.
And finally to Jesse Ruiz.
Thank God we're all Democrats, because we're not going to disagree on this one. We're all going to vigorously fight to defend the LGBTQ community's rights, the Human Rights Act. And what we also need to do is, right now, we have a candidate for governor who's airing the most xenophobic, homophobic, bigoted ad I've ever seen in politics. And we need to call this stuff out. You know, we're going to be one of 6 constitutional officers that has a large platform to litigate, yes, but also set the moral compass for the rest of our state and call things out when you see it. So I was happy to call out Jeannie Ives' ad as the bigoted, xenophobic, and homophobic ad that it is, and we need to call it out when we see it.
Our next question, submitted in a couple of different forms by the Illinois AFL-CIO and the Illinois Trial Lawyers Association, inquiring about workers' compensation laws in Illinois and asking, in effect, what measures would you take to defend or to reform existing workers' comp laws in the state of Illinois? That question goes first to Aaron Goldstein.
So unions are crucial to our economy. I'm a proud former AFSCME member. My wife is an AFSCME member. And we must do everything we can to protect the workers of this state. And the Attorney General has that ability, has that power to defend the rights of the working class. So we must be fighting, and I will do everything I can to fight and advocate on behalf of workers' benefits. And we also have to look at some of the history of legislation that's happened in this state, most specifically the pension bill, which has really put us backwards. That pension bill was unconstitutional. It was clearly unconstitutional, and it was anti-worker. It was anti-union. And now we're stuck in this morass, and now we're stuck with Bruce Rauner because of the pension bill. So we must have an absolute advocate for workers' rights and the working class of this state, and I will be that.
All right. And now to Renato Mariotti.
Sure. So to respond to that point, I am somebody who believes that unions are under attack, not only by the Rauner administration, but by the Trump administration, and the next attorney general in this state is going to have to fight to make sure that our unions survive. It's literally a fight for the survival of our unions. We have a case that's now in the Supreme Court called Janus that is going to really hurt unions, and we're going to have to pass legislation that's going to counteract that. It may be allowing people to deduct union dues off their taxes. It may be, for example, giving education to union members about the importance of paying dues to a union. We're going to have to do whatever we can to help our unions survive, because I will tell you, as somebody who has a dad who works at a non-union place, if you are not working in a union place, you realize the importance of having somebody who's going to fight for you to make sure you have the wages and hours that you need. My dad doesn't have that. But in addition to that, I will say on the workers' comp issue, just like I mentioned with wage theft, we need to have an attorney general who understands what it's like to struggle to make ends meet. And I've been in that situation. And if you're harmed, you need that money, I'll be somebody who will fight for you to make sure you get it.
Pat Quinn.
I signed a bipartisan bill for workmen's compensation. I believe it was fair and just. I don't think you should take injured workers, as Rauner wants to do, and harm them further, and so I don't really believe in his approach to this issue. I think the Attorney General's got to work against it. As was mentioned, wage theft is a real problem in Illinois for people who work hard and then aren't paid their overtime, aren't paid their just wages. Again, that's the duty of the Attorney General, to take on those unfair employers who are violating the law. I also think we need to raise the minimum wage in our state. I worked for that all my life. I think it's very, very important we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Attorney General's got to be a strong voice for that. And then in the workplace, there are things that aren't right. When I was governor, I signed a bill to ban discrimination against pregnant women in the workplace. We're made to lift heavy boxes, denied work breaks, denied water breaks. We signed a law against that kind of harassment. And I think it's important for the Attorney General always to be fighting for everyday people who work.
The question again asks, what measures would you take to defend and or reform workers' comp laws in Illinois? Now to Nancy Rotering.
One of the most important tasks of the Attorney General is to defend and support our working families. And it's so important for people to recognize that if they're injured on the job, that they will be fairly compensated, that they will be able to get back to work if they're able, and if they aren't able to do that job, to then be retrained and receive the necessary resources to be able to continue and pick up on another way to provide for their families. But let's talk also about the importance of providing for safe workplaces and holding employers accountable, because the best way to avoid having to get workers' comp is to be able to work in a place that's actually safe from the get-go, and to know that those protections are being provided for all of our working families.
Jesse Ruiz.
I mean, it's critical, especially in an era when you have employers who are trying to put off their obligations to their employees to properly insure them onto the state. And so we have to make sure that that system is there to protect employees. I have a niece who's a young attorney, got into a car accident related to her job, and her firm docked her pay and wants her to file the workers' comp claim. And she's a lawyer, and her own law firm is trying to put off that obligation, not on its own self, but onto the state. And so we have to make sure that all employers don't shirk on their obligations to keep their employers whole, healthy, and safe, and proactively do this, and make sure that, especially in an era where you have, my wife and I had a child care worker, we made sure we paid our workers' comp insurance as an employer of our babysitter, and make sure that all folks are doing this, because we have more and more working families working in non-conventional settings, and we have to make sure everybody's contributing and supporting for the safety of every worker in the state.
And finally, to Sharon Fairley.
So I believe that attacks on workers and working families is another way that the powerful try to exacerbate income inequality that exists in our society today, and it's a big problem. The Attorney General can play a very big role in pushing back against these unpleasant forces. And so I will defend workers' rights, whether it comes to workers' compensation, whether it comes to the right to collectively bargain, minimum wage, prevailing wage. These are all things that the Attorney General can stand up and has the platform to stand up against. Most importantly, I believe that we need to work on and finally solve the pension reform problem that we have here. And you have a candidate in this race, two candidates in this race. One actually sponsored the pension reform bill that was unconstitutional. The other one signed it. And so this is a bill that was really harmful to workers. So when we talk about who's really going to stand up for workers, let's look to what they've done in the past.
Candidates, thank you. I believe we have now one of our candidates who was late in arriving but is able to join us now. Representative Scott Drury will be taking the stage here as we get ready for our next question. And this one is submitted from Planned Parenthood of Illinois, asking in effect, what steps will you take to defend a woman's right to choose and to have access to a full range of health care services? That question will go first to Renato Mariotti.
Well, as co-chair of Lawyers for Choice, it's something that I have been working on in my private capacity as well, and I will tell you that we are now in a situation where our reproductive rights are under threat more than they have been in quite some time. We had a great victory this last year, HB 40, which, frankly, not only protects a woman's right to choose, even if the Supreme Court takes it away nationally, but also, more importantly, provides, and just as importantly, I should say, provides access to reproductive services for state employees and others. Very important. There's a conservative group that is suing to try to invalidate HB 40. We need to defend it, and we need to do more proactively. There are these groups called crisis pregnancy centers that mislead women, that essentially lie to women and try to trick women and mislead them about their choices. We need to stop that as well. That's something I'm going to do as Attorney General. I'm going to build a wall around reproductive rights.
Governor Quinn.
Well, I think this is the fundamental law of Illinois and our country, and we do need to defend that. That's the job of the Attorney General. Sometimes one person, overcome by lobbyists and so on, needs an advocate, a champion, and that's the Attorney General of Illinois, to make sure that the fundamental right of choice, a right of privacy, is always protected. This is one of the most human, important values that we have, the right of someone to control their own body. And I've worked on that issue as governor, and I defended that issue. I was in a campaign in 2010 against someone who wanted to take away that right. And I beat him in the election. And I intend in this election, I'm running against someone, if I'm nominated, who doesn't have the same reverence for the right of choice as we do here on this panel. So this is a fundamental issue in the campaign. Our candidates believe in the right of choice. The Republican candidate does not. And that's why we have to win.
Mr. Ruiz.
I've got two sons, but they're 13 and 17, so I don't even want to start thinking about that yet. But I know you have to as a parent, so yes, I will do everything within the power of the office to make sure we always protect women's right to choose and without exception, and make sure we always enforce that here. Two things. When I was at the Chicago Board of Education, I'm glad that we enacted a curriculum to make sure that there was sex education in school, so that we make sure people learn, students learn this at an early age. It is their right. And making sure also that we, as Democrats, we make sure that we turn Congress, because I worry about the president packing the court, and he's appointing judges at a rate we've never seen before. So we've got to not lose our eye off that we've got to make sure that he doesn't get another Supreme Court pick, one that frankly was stolen from the Dems, and make sure we turn Congress.
The question is, again, what steps will you take to protect a woman's right to choose and defend her full range of access to a variety of health care choices? That now goes to Representative Scott Drury. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Springfield. My name is Scott Drury. I'm a former federal prosecutor and a sitting state representative from up north. So I've been on the front lines of the battle for choice. I was a co-sponsor of HB 40, proud to speak about that bill on the floor and make sure that we had the votes to get it passed. But it's not enough just to talk about the bills that I've sponsored. We need to talk about what will the Attorney General do to protect a woman's right to choose, because there are a lot of laws on the books right now that simply aren't being enforced. We passed a law, the health care right of conscience. If a doctor chooses not to provide health care services to somebody because of his or her beliefs, we passed a law, I was a sponsor of that law, that says he doesn't have to do that, but he certainly has to tell the patient where she can go to get the services that she needs. That law is not being enforced, and as an Attorney General, I'm going to make sure that we enforce all of the laws on the books to make sure that everybody's rights are protected, especially women's. I'm 100% pro-choice, have been endorsed by Personal PAC and Planned Parenthood in all of my elections, and I will continue to do that as your Attorney General. Thank you.
Now to Sharon Fairley.
Thank you. The woman's right to choose is a civil right, and women need to have access to reproductive health care. It's just an absolute civil right. I can barely even talk about the fact that we are actually in 2018 and having a debate about whether or not women should have access to contraceptives. This is something that we have to push back on that, and the Attorney General has to take a leadership role and really staying toe-to-toe and being extremely vigilant to make sure that there aren't any further inroads against women's rights. And this is just one of many women's rights that are under attack. There's also, the income inequality issue that needs to be dealt with. So there's a lot of ways in which the Attorney General needs to stand up for women in this state, and as a woman, I will do so.
And to Aaron Goldstein.
I'm proudly pro-choice, and it just boggles my mind every day that someone wants to interfere with someone's body. It just makes no sense fundamentally, and I think everyone here at this table agrees. I'm proudly outnumbered 3-1 in my house, women to men, and they influence me every day, and just a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old, so we don't even want to talk about some of the issues that were already discussed just earlier. But the point is that we need to be strong and vigilant on our rights within this state. Because what happens is there's really two ways of attacking pro-choice. One is, as Mr. Ruiz indicated, the attack on the courts, basically, packing the court, so you in essence change the interpretation of the Constitution to say that there's no longer choice. And two is these laws that come around at the edges to infringe on a woman's right to choose. And we need to be very vigilant to stop those laws from being enacted, number one, and enforce the laws on the books.
Candidates, thank you. Our next question has to do with the interpretation of the Constitution, in this case, the Illinois Constitution. How do you interpret the pension clause of the Illinois Constitution, and will you defend it in court, or should the courts modify how that clause is implemented? Governor Quinn.
Well, the case was heard by the Supreme Court. I think it was a very clear decision of the court. You have to respect the decision when it's made, and I think given the circumstances, the Attorney General should abide by that. When I was governor, I paid the pension amount every year. I was the first governor in a very long time. Both Democrat and Republican governors didn't pay the proper pension amount that was required to go into the various funds. I did. I also signed a bill that reformed the pensions of future employees. Controversial, it was not popular with some, but the taxpayers were very happy with that, and I signed it into law. And I won an election in 2010 having done that. I think it is a very difficult issue. I think the Attorney General has to work with members of the legislature, both parties, to find any kinds of constitutional pension reforms. I think it is helpful that the court, for the first time in the recent case, gave guidance to all of us, and we have to accept that guidance.
Nancy Rotering.
It would be my pleasure to agree with the Supreme Court and to absolutely agree and uphold the belief that pensions are a constitutional right of the people who've earned them. You can't change the horse midstream. This is a benefit that has been agreed to, that's being provided to people. It's important that especially our first responders and our teachers and so forth know that they can have a secure retirement. As a mayor, I've made this commitment. We're required to fund our pensions 90% by 2040. We're putting in 100% because I want my first responders and those who work for me to know I've got your back. I'm going to make sure that you have that secure retirement that you've earned, and it's important to uphold the finding of the Supreme Court.
Jesse Ruiz.
Again, I think you're going to find concurrence across the board here in this panel that the Constitution is clear. The Supreme Court decision was clear in upholding that. And I respect that decision and would support it. We do obviously have a pension crisis in the state going forward. I also agree that you can't change the deal on people once they've signed up and they're 20, 30 years into a career. That's simply just not fair. And so if you want to go back for brand new employees, as we've done, and start readdressing these and looking at seeing what we can fund that's agreed upon on a contractual basis, but the law is clear.
Scott Drury.
When I joined the General Assembly in 2013, the biggest conversation taking place was were we going to pass SB 1, which was the pension reform at the time. Before that, there were conversations going back and forth on both sides, with both sides equally trying not to do anything and continue to have uncertainty for the employees and the hard workers that have put their sweat labor into teaching our children and into protecting us. I was the one on the floor during the debate said, you know what, we have to send a bill to the Supreme Court because no one in the General Assembly can make this decision, and we use it as a crutch. We use it as a crutch to do nothing. And so I advocated getting it over to the 7 justices across the street so we could get a roadmap of what we need to do, what is constitutional. You know what we got? We have a roadmap. And it's so great to hear everybody talk about that decision and it's a roadmap because I was the one who came up with the idea. Now we need to look forward. What are we going to do? Are we going to offer buyouts? Are we going to reform the system going forward? It's not enough just to say I would agree with the Supreme Court. The pension debt is the biggest crisis facing the state of Illinois, and we have to come up with solutions that are not on the workers' backs, but are going to allow our children to want to continue to stay in this state.
The question again, how do you interpret the pension clause of the Illinois Constitution, and will you defend it in court, or should the courts modify how that clause is implemented? Sharon Fairley.
So I agree with the court when they decided that the pension reform bill was unconstitutional. I mean, all you have to do is read the clause. It says you cannot change a contract with regard to a pension after the fact. And I don't believe that it should be changed because it's really just a basic concept of contract law. Once you agree to a contract, then you're committed to fulfilling the obligations that you agreed to under that contract. And so the bigger issue is one thing I agree with Mr. Drury on. The political leadership in the state has dismally failed us on this. They have kicked the can down the road year after year after year. And so the last thing we need is more of the same, of the usual suspects who all they're going to do is kick the can down the road. We need a real solution, and we need new thinking and new independent leadership to get that done.
Aaron Goldstein.
Someone who decides to work in public service makes an agreement, which is they're not going to be compensated a whole lot, but they're going to work honorable work. And in exchange for that, they're going to get a decent pension. And then to violate that agreement is reprehensible. And to say that, hey, you know what? We just needed a roadmap. We just needed some guidance from the Supreme Court. So let's just throw a law out there and see what sticks. Someone is asking you to be the top law enforcement officer, the top lawyer in the state of Illinois, and they tell you, well, you know what, we're just going to throw something up against the wall and see what sticks. That's ridiculous. You want someone who knows the law, who understands the law the first time, and we cannot elect someone who doesn't understand the law.
And Renato Mariotti.
I have to say that it's really something to hear state legislators and who passed this bill, a governor who signed this bill trying to offer excuses for it, when I got to tell you on its face it was pretty obvious it violated the Illinois Constitution. It wasn't a surprise to anyone who knows anything about law, and a lot of people who don't know much about law, that the Supreme Court unanimously rejected that bill. It's pretty straightforward that you can't take away what you've already given somebody. It's right there in the Illinois Constitution. And the real tragedy of all these politicians coming up with this is that not only did they waste a lot of time and energy on it, but they wasted the money of unions who had to litigate against the state, and the AG's office had to waste resources fighting them. It's a disgrace to our state, and we deserve better, and that's why we need a clean house and get rid of some of these politicians who, frankly, are playing games with our pensions and playing games with labor. Stop voting for the same people who are digging away your pensions. Don't do it.
Candidates, we've already touched upon this issue a time or two this evening, but let's put all the cards on the table now. What is your policy regarding accepting donations from businesses or individuals involved in areas that may come under the scrutiny of the Attorney General? This question goes first to Nancy Rodering.
So in 2011, there were a lot of storms running through northern Illinois, and the power kept going out. As I mentioned, I'm a mom, and it was driving me crazy. I'm the mayor, and I was getting a lot of phone calls. And then when the sun was out, the power was going out, and that was even worse because you couldn't expect anything to be consistent. So I called on ComEd and held them accountable, brought them before our city, called hearings with the Energy Commission, and ended up joining Lisa Madigan in a lawsuit that went to the Illinois Supreme Court. At the end of the day, $56 million were invested in the electrical infrastructure in northern Illinois thanks to the efforts that we put forward. So needless to say, nobody was more surprised than I when they called and said, we'd like to give you a campaign contribution. This is a horrible system. We need campaign finance reform. We're running across the state of Illinois with 7 media markets. I didn't start, like some of my colleagues here, with many hundreds of thousands of dollars in my war chest, and so I do need to communicate with the people of Illinois. It is a drop in the bucket of what's necessary for this budget, but most importantly, I've been in elected office for 9 years. No one's ever gotten a favor from me because of a contribution.
Jesse Ruiz.
Agreed, and I did accept contributions from ComEd, Exelon, and People's Gas, and I was a proud meter reader for People's Gas in college. That's how I helped put myself through college, so I'm glad they remember their former meter reader and have faith and confidence in my leadership. Never pulled a punch. Never pulled a punch on anybody. I mean, when a legislator tried to insert a member initiative in our State Board of Education budget, and I said that wouldn't be appropriate because he wanted to fund a private religious school with public dollars. The legislator put forth a bill getting rid of my State Board of Education. I didn't flinch. Well, he was trying to fire me from a volunteer job, which wasn't, incredibly threatening. But when, Mayor Emanuel's own good friend Forrest Claypool was doing what I thought was wrong, I didn't flinch in calling him out. And he's the man who appointed me to the current position I have and my prior position. I've never shirked or flinched at calling out anything I've seen wrong, and I will never pull a punch, regardless of who has contributed to my campaigns.
Representative Drury?
Come on. So, I've been in the General Assembly since 2013. In my first race in 2012, a campaign contribution came in from somebody you might know, Michael Madigan. $20,000. And I sent it back. In 2014, I said I'm not taking contributions from the party anymore, not because I'm not a great Democrat, but because I wanted the independence. I didn't want to have the clause in me from the party. And so what was amazing was Mike Madigan and Tim Mapes, his chief of staff, kept calling me saying, here's $10,000. No, I don't want it. Here's $35,000. No, I don't want it. It's on my desk. If you just come, you can have it today. I don't want it. If you don't want people's hooks in you, you know what you do? You don't take the money. And it's not okay to sit here and say, oh, well, this is a tough race, and it's a tough race, so I'm going to let my morals go and compromise my principles and take the money. That's what has gotten Springfield in all the trouble that it wants. When I was prosecuting public corruption, those were the stories that we heard. If we want to end this and clean up the state of Illinois, we need to elect officials who are serious about their duties and are not going to sit here and make up excuses for taking huge contributions from people.
Thank you. Now to Sharon Fairley.
Can I just reiterate? Give me a break. I mean, are you serious? We need an attorney general who is above the fray and who has, this is a judgment issue. This is a judgment issue. And when people say, oh, I was surprised that I got the call, as far as I know, Exelon responded that they responded to requests for donations. This is a really important issue because we need an attorney general who will make the right ethical decisions. Jesse, I've heard say, character means what you do when nobody's looking. Well, here everybody's looking, and this is what you do. So what are we going to think you're going to do when nobody's looking? The same thing. In Highland Park, there are signs that say character is what you do when nobody's looking. Well, if this is what you do when people are looking, what are you going to do when nobody's looking? This is really a serious issue, and it's a judgment issue, and it's a problem.
Again, what's your policy regarding accepting donations from businesses or individuals involved in areas that may come under the scrutiny of the Attorney General? Aaron Goldstein?
My policy is not take money from them. If they call me, it'd be wonderful to talk to, who is it, Mr. ComEd or Mr. Tobacco? No, thank you. And I actually am proud. They didn't call me. So maybe they think I'm going to be independent, and that's an important thing. So look, there's an old phrase, you can't serve two masters. And that's the reality. If I am the attorney for you all, the state of Illinois, and I go into court on behalf of you against the tobacco companies, $100,000 given to one of my opponents who's not here presently, or ComEd or Exelon or the coal companies given to my opponent who's not here presently, if I'm representing you against that coal company or against the utility or against the tobacco companies, do you believe I'm going to be fighting for you if I took money from them? And what's going to happen? I'm going to probably, because the rule of ethics say as a lawyer you have to recuse yourself. Well, who's going to pay for it? We're going to have to hire private counsel to come in and do my job? That's ridiculous.
Renato Mariotti.
Yeah, I don't think, one thing I'll tell you that this is the first time I've ever run for office, and I've learned a lot, not just about how Illinois politics works, but about all the BS that there is with campaign finance. And one of them, you're not going to believe this, there are no contribution limits in this race. No contribution limits. I mean, the guy all the way at the end who was complaining about taking money broke the cash by giving himself $300,000. He took a $150,000 check from a Republican. The guy at the other end who's talking about ComEd, he's on the board of ComEd. I mean, there is just so much money flowing into a race like this. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. You know what? My average contribution is under $100. I'm running a grassroots campaign, and it's hard. It's hard. My biggest fundraiser is my dog. I put pictures of my dog on Twitter, and I get little contributions. True story. But you know what? It's okay because you need an attorney general who's independent. You need an attorney general who's only dependent on lots of people giving small contributions, because if we don't have that, we're going to have an attorney general who's bought and sold, and we deserve better than that.
Pat Quinn.
Well, I signed the law for campaign contributions. I'm unhappy that that has been broken, the self-funding limit. I have never accepted campaign contributions from the utility company, whether it's ComEd or any of the others. I am not in this campaign because, as mentioned by Aaron and others, it's a conflict of interest. Consumer issues are the heart and soul of the Illinois Attorney General. A long time ago, Harry Truman said the most sensitive nerve in the body is the pocketbook nerve. And we have to have an Attorney General who's fighting for the pocketbooks of consumers. That means that these big banks, the insurance companies, big tobacco, the utilities, all of them who want to influence the Attorney General with campaign donations, you've got to say no. It is disappointing that one of the candidates who's taken the most money of anybody sitting here, probably more than all put together, is not here. I think he has to defend the fact that we don't want an Attorney General who's on the campaign payroll of all these powerful interests aligned against everyday consumers.
Candidates, thank you so much. We're down to our final question here, all the time we have remaining, so we'd like you to take this opportunity to deliver your final message. What message would you like to leave this audience and our audience statewide with as at the conclusion of this forum? We begin with Jesse Ruiz.
Yes, as you've all heard, thank God we're all Democrats. We're not that far apart in a lot of the issues. But you have to judge us and select and vote on March 20th or earlier, depending on when that date might be resolved now. And so how are you going to make that decision? How are you going to distinguish among us? And you're going to look at, hopefully, what we've done professionally, what we've done in our public service roles. If they've not been, again, I've not been a career public servant. I've been a volunteer public servant for almost 20 years. But I also ask you to look at And as Sharon mentioned, I do say, what were we doing when no one was looking? And when do we begin our careers of public service? You know, I was organizing Little League teams when I was fresh out of Champaign and Roseland. I was involved in community policing, and you can find the video footage when I was talking about this 25 years ago, not 13 years ago, or whenever it is I was appointed or elected to office. Look at our commitment to service and how we've served with integrity throughout our lives.
Your time is up now. Thank you. Scott Drury.
My name is Scott Drury, and I'm running for Attorney General to clean up the state of Illinois. It's what I've been doing my entire career in public service. I started it at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Chicago under Pat Fitzgerald, where I prosecuted corrupt public officials, where I prosecuted an entire police department, and the police department itself was a racketeering organization because it wasn't protecting people. I took that same attitude to the General Assembly and have been pushing ethics reform. I've been pushing for change. I've stood up to the most powerful interests in the state of Illinois. I'm the only Democrat in the last 3 decades who had the courage to say no to Mike Madigan and not vote for him for Speaker of the House. My guess is I missed some comments before I got here about Donald Trump, but let's face it, Illinois was not on the right track before Donald Trump got into office. And let's face it, Illinois was not on the right track before Bruce Rauner got into office. We have to own it as Democrats and make sure that we are the party that is recruiting people. We are the party of the future, that young people, rich people, poor people, everybody wants to be a Democrat, and unfortunately, because of decisions made in this state and not behaving properly, we're losing that. I'm here to return the state to its rightful owner, which is all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Sharon Fairley.
Thank you for being here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I will tell you that although there are some similarities among us on our positions on polities, there are very big differences on our personal characteristics and our personal backgrounds. I was raised by 2 dedicated public servants who used their careers to pursue quality education for all citizens, and I became a lawyer specifically to serve. As a lawyer, I have only served the citizens of Illinois. I haven't worked for a big company. I haven't worked for a big bank. I also am not a politician. I have never been governor, nor have I ever sought to be governor. But what I want to do is be the top lawyer for the state. I was a little girl in the 60s. I was a young teenager in the 70s when the women's movement was getting off the ground. In the 80s, I started my professional life when women were still very rare in political life. I have had to fight for myself all my life, but through hard work and perseverance, I have stood up for myself, and I've stood up for the clients that I have represented, and that's what I want to do as your Attorney General. I will bring courage, tenacity, and the legal prowess necessary to do this job, and I hope to have your support in March. Thank you.
Now to Aaron Goldstein.
I follow a simple biblical quote: justice thou shalt pursue. I want to be the greatest advocate for justice that this office has ever seen. I want to stand up for us. And we talked a lot about certain issues, and that's standing up to the big banks and corporations and Donald Trump. We talked about fighting for corruption. We didn't talk enough today about criminal justice reform, real criminal justice reform. I've spent my career working in the criminal justice system, and the reality is it isn't just. I want to be an advocate for real reform, to end this drug war, which is racist, to end mass incarceration, stop cash bail. People are sitting in jail right now because they can't afford $100. That's absolutely ridiculous. It hurts all of us. I want to be the greatest advocate for justice, and that's what will guide me my entire tenure as Attorney General.
Again, the question is your final thoughts to this audience as this forum comes to a close. Renato Mariotti.
Well, as you probably figured out from the way I talk, I'm not a politician. I'm the only person up here who hasn't been an elected politician or somebody appointed by Mike Madigan or Rahm Emanuel. I am something different. I am somebody who is a federal prosecutor and was an accomplished attorney who decided that I wanted to get active fighting Donald Trump, fighting for things I cared about like the environment and the freedom to choose. And when I saw this opportunity, I felt like this was an opportunity to do something for the people of Illinois. And I'm running a different kind of campaign, a campaign that relies on small contributions, a campaign that's engaging thousands of people across the state that are phone banking and text banking. And so what I'm going to encourage all of you is this. If you want a different kind of Illinois, don't vote for the same people. Get involved and lean in. Join our effort. Be one of those people phone banking. Be one of those people text banking. Join our Central Illinois for Renato group and be part of this change. Go to RenatoMariotti.com. Come see me afterwards. Be part of our movement to change Illinois and change our party.
Now to Pat Quinn.
Well, I think the Attorney General must be a lawyer for the people, and I'm a people person. I've been a public interest lawyer all my life. I don't represent corporations. I represent consumers and taxpayers, veterans, workers, voters. I think you have to have somebody who really understands everyday people. I've had more clients than everybody here put together. I understand the people of Illinois, good and true, deserve an attorney general who represents them. Collect a lot of signatures in my life, more than 4 million signatures on petitions for ethics reform and making sure we had a citizen utility board that took on the utilities. I think it's very important that we take on Trump right now. That's the job of the Attorney General of Illinois, to defend our democracy. Our democracy is under attack by Trump and his allies. So it's important to have someone who's a strong voice for Illinois, who knows our entire state. I know it like the back of my hand, whether you're downstate or in the suburbs, live in the city of Chicago. I've been there for you all my life, and I will do that as Attorney General.
And finally to Nancy Rotering.
We're a state in crisis. We're a nation in crisis. Our civil rights, our human rights, our very fundamental rights as a democracy are under attack. And it's really important, as we go through this primary and look towards November, that we elect an Attorney General who has a passion for advocacy, who isn't showing up green, ready to go, with no clue about what it takes to run a government. I have that experience. I bring that background. I've been a mayor for 7 years, and I know how to get things done. I bring a record, a true record of advocacy, starting decades ago. I'm so proud to be here tonight with Loretta Durbin in the front row. I am the past president of the Illinois Women's Institute for Leadership, an organization that trains women to run for office. Women are the future. We need to have somebody who is qualified to go up against Erica Harold in November. My name's Nancy Rotering, and I'd love your support. Thank you.
Candidates, we are out of time. Thank you all so much. To the audience, thank you for giving us your full and undivided attention this evening. Now, please join me in giving a long overdue round of applause for all of our candidates here tonight. They'll be meeting and greeting you afterwards.